Well, hello everyone. I had kind of planned on doing this vid a little differently, but as you can see, I've got a baby on me. And the baby's real big, as you can see. A big, healthy baby Richilla. Now, I had promised in an earlier live that I would do a big reveal about why I came to YouTube. I've told the story about my therapist and our argument, and I always say that in the end, I just said yes. But I didn't actually go into the internals that made me say yes. And now we will start to talk about it. You see, I have been diagnosed with 6 distinct ego states. And they do things. And we will go over that a bit. Rachel, I mean, really, this would be easier without you. Now, it all goes back to birth. I was born with 3 defects. One fatal, but they put in a urinary tract. Well, we'll just summarize this slowly and won't get into too much detail, but I spent the first 6 months of my life in the hospital, cut up as a baby. They had to do 3 operations, and after each operation, they said I would not live the night. Well, obviously, you can see I did live the night, and I am here. But, it did have its consequences. You have your normal baby sitting there, which would be considered the core ego state. Well, when you're in that much pain as a baby, you start to feel a bit animalistic. Think about it. When you're hurt, does not your inner animal come out? And that develops the first one, the feral. Now, everyone has ego states, though most people's are not distinct. But this ego state, everyone typically has some kind of version of the feral. Or that feral evolves into something. That's the side where, when there's human danger, that typically would be engaged. Hello, little Thor, you're going to come up here too. This is going to be interesting. So, those are the first 2, the core ego state, the damaged one, and the feral. Well, I spent the first 6 months of my life mostly in an incubator, heavily damaged. As a baby, I could not out and interact with the world. Well, as I mentioned, I wasn't supposed to live. So what do you do with someone that isn't supposed to live? You put them on an incredible amount of drugs. Now, my therapist and I had a long talk about this perception of time. You see, for that first 6 months of life, there was only suffering. But that was 100% of my experience. So that is the true origin on my PTSD, and it's the root cause on why I get a check. So, it created its own ego state because there was a point past the core ego state and the human animal to take the pain. So it created another ego state. And this ego state runs off pure adrenaline. Yes, it does. Doesn't it, honey? It's what it wants. Now, it's like when you go on a roller coaster, I just smile on a roller coaster. I don't, typically have the same reaction everyone else does. And it is this ego state. And it started out not being needed much. But, I have always liked the surge of adrenaline. I mean, in reality, adrenaline is my drug of choice. Just saying. She's played outside all day. So, it created this third ego state. Now, as a child, when there was something tough, this ego state was better at it than, my core ego state. And it started out as the adventurer. So I started out with a core ego state, a feral ego state, and an adventurer. Well, as life goes on, and, as a child, there were more additions to the team. And the funny thing is one was consciously created by me as a child, the Knight, because things weren't right at my house. So, and I desired a sense of order, of right and wrong. And because my father was a human pile of garbage, that helped develop and cultivate the Knight ego state. And it sees everything in black and white. And it has its own functions. Now, in the crib still, that first 6 months, I didn't get out to see the world. So I had another ego state form then, the Magus. I had to perceive the world through an incubator for 6 months. And, of course I was told this, no way I remember any of this, but, my family said by 1 year old, I mastered walking and talking. And this ego state is why I'm smart. And it has its own functions. Now, when I give explanations to you on YouTube, that is the one that's being dominant while I am explaining. She says, I don't care. So, this gives me 4 ego states then. Now, my father decided to stop feeding me at 6 years old, and he was beating the living hell out of me. And because he said, you're eating beans or you ain't eating nothing, boy. I ate nothing. So I had to go out in the world, and from 6 to 13, I had to come up with my own grub. And this helped develop one that I called the scavenger. And we went out into the world and we made our ways. Now, these ego states had some evolution. Now, the scavenger eventually by 15 developed into one that we called the devil. And he does socialization. He does business. And most people like him. Yes, yes, yes. And the Knight is, like I say, he's my sense of right or wrong. Now, the Knight always says no. If I ever have to say no, that's the Knight. Now, my therapist was very good at telling whose is what, but this was the one place where she made mistakes. When the Knight would take a hard stand, she would mistake it for being the adventurer. And the adventurer eventually, by 15, developed into one that we called the rattlesnake. And it was the dominant ego state. Because of all of the childhood traumas, the adventurer, the one that liked adrenaline, became the dominant ego state throughout most of my life. The world didn't like that. I mean, really, really. It did not work out well for the world. It did for me, but not for everyone else. Now, once again, my old therapist would think that something negative might have been out of the rattlesnake, but the rattlesnake is extremely flexible. He doesn't say no. We will continue discussion. Now, the Knight, he says no, because once again, these 5 ego states extra, well, they're not really extra, but so you say distinct extra, they're extremely helpful. The Knight, the strategy. The Magus is super intelligent. And I can do some amazing things because of him. Now, an interesting thing is, they need each other. So basically, I have 5 guys working in my head with, one, the core ego state. And it does emotion. And that's all it does, really. When I'm dysfunctional, I should say. But, this was my system, going into therapy and such years ago. She says, I'm waking up. Now, I'm going to do this video in 2 parts because this is going to get really long if I don't. So, I'm explaining on how this happened. Now, ego states are normal. Everyone has them. Most are not distinct. Now, Rich Life, he has distinct ego states in my opinion. Amberlyn Reed has distinct ego states in my opinion. And they're not multiple personalities. Now, in a way, mine are so distinct you could almost say they are. But how it works for me, it's like a team working together in my head, feeding me information. And the feral is extremely perceptive. He's not very talkative. So, you don't see him much on YouTube. Now, an interesting thing is I only have 2 ego states that sleep. The core ego state and the feral. If I cannot slide into those 2 ego states, I don't get to sleep. And just like this week, I went out partying for a few days. I stayed in the rattlesnake ego state and, I stayed just as coherent as I am now. Oh, my kitty says, shut up and sleep with me. But, they work together. Now, the rattlesnake ego state tends to be a bit abrasive. He is not worried much about feelings. And that comes back down to our origin of him. The amount of human suffering that I have felt in my life, the rattlesnake ego state looks at everyone else and says, boo-hoo. I mean, he can be less than compassionate. But, we have the core ego state for that. And that's what I was working on in therapy. Now, things have been very hard for me, so my system has kind of hit a reset. Because we have found out through therapy that I can endure unbelievable psychological trauma, and I have a reset button. Yes, I kind of nicknamed it the feral reset. Because, once again, from my early life and all the trauma, like the situation I've been in, in the last 9 months, help's not coming. So, it's time for my inner system to take over and do its thing. I didn't want it this way, but it's the way that it's going to be. Now, this is the system that I have to live with. Now, the point of this entire long rant, each of these distinct ego states has an opinion. So in my head, whenever I have anything, I have basically 6 voices feeding me info. I have 6 opinions, and I have to decide which one's the right. Now, the people that like me on YouTube, this is why you like me. Because I have these 6 different opinions, and we argue with each other. And once again, there's usually consensus. My system, we usually go with consensus. Now, I had 5 ego states telling me one thing, and I had 1 ego state saying the complete opposite. And the ego states could not finish the argument. So while I argued with that therapist, I constructed a scenario that my ego states could have a competition. And we could decide which part of us was right. And that's why I always laughed with everyone saying, I know why you came to YouTube, or you're grifting, or any of this other stuff. And this is where I'm going to end part one. Why? Because Richella is picking my nose. Now, everyone, please put your comments below and have a good day. And I'll do the big part of the reveal tomorrow. And it should be a lot shorter. Now, everyone, have a good night.